So very welcome today to today's panel on the licensing training for eVTOL pilots. And before we start, of course, some housekeeping elements. I think it's on the next slide. I also have to practice a bit on my side here. So as you've probably seen on some of the other meeting events, there's the Slido app, and we would really encourage you to use it, of course. And I also saw some microphones in the audience that can also be used, of course, if you do not want to use Slido. So during the panel discussion, we'll be switching between the Slido, the slides, just to ensure to complement the discussions, let's say, as we're talking about particular subtopics. So there's nothing unusual about that. Maybe just to say also that maybe in comparison to some of the other panels, today actually gives you a unique opportunity to participate in kind of a rulemaking discussion in a way, because the things we're going to discuss are still very much subject to the ongoing rulemaking discussion. And the panelists that we have here are mostly representing some of the experts that are inside this rulemaking activity. So this is called the banner slide, so you can see all the participants there. If you look at and do the math, you can see that maybe one of them is missing. And if I'm not mistaken, that person is with us as well. And in fact, it's my colleague KUCHER. And I was told that his picture would appear on the side there in a live version through Zoom. So it's the first time we're doing this. I'm hopeful that we can show him at some point. So going through the panelists, maybe starting with myself as moderator. I mean, I'm as it says here, I'm the manager for the Aircrew and Medical standards and implementation. So that kind of covers anything that has to do with training, licensing of personnel inside the aircrew domain. And on top of that, also the standardized implementation across Europe of those requirements. And so that's my background a little bit. And before this, I was an airline pilot and also a simulator instructor. So slowly I progressed into this role at the EASA that then looks after the requirements. With me today, we have an excellent panel covering various areas from industry, starting with Ms. Regine VADROT. She has more than 40 years experience in the aviation industry. She started her career as a simulator engineer, worked at the French Flight Test Center, and then joined Airbus, where she led all the operational suitability evaluations for Airbus aircraft from the A320 all the way up to the A350. Recently, she retired from Airbus, and she's now acting as a consultant and a senior advisor to Lilium. And for those that don't know, Lilium is one of the eVTOL manufacturers, the upcoming ones. Then we have Mr. Rob Akron. He has an extensive experience within the aviation industry as well. He has an engineering background, and at the same time, he's also a commercial pilot operating airplanes, helicopters, and remotely piloted aircraft. He is currently the head of training at Westflug. This is an approved training organization, and he indicates that they are using, as one of the first ATOs, electrical aircraft in their training. He today represents the European Cockpit Association. Then we have Mr. Frantz CHOUT. He's currently the Aircrew Personnel Rulemaking Office Director at the French Civil Aviation Safety Directorate since 2012. He has a long more than 25-year career where he managed a number of civil aviation personal safety regulatory projects as head of the Aeronautical Personal Safety Rulemaking Office, covering pilots as well as air traffic controllers. And he is, of course, the French representative at the EASA rulemaking activity, as well as the advisory body that deals with the aircrew domain. Frantz also would like to highlight that he's passionate about new technologies. And today he's responsible for the FCL Airshow project, as well as what I mentioned, the future on the training and licensing rulemaking work. Then we have Mr. Olivier REINHARDT. He is the Chief Risk and Certification Officer of Volocopter, having built his first crewed electric aircraft already back in 1996. Oliver spent much professional life with the development, production, and introduction of novel aircraft categories in various jurisdictions. At Volocopter, Oliver and his team are responsible to ensure certification of all Volocopter products and organizations but also to build all required air operation entities, which also includes the license, training, and as needed to commercially operate the Velocity air taxi, which is destined to be at the Paris Olympics in 2024. So that's the ambition there with Volocopter. Then last but not least, as I mentioned already, Mr. Christian KUCHER joining remotely. The reason why he's joining remotely is because whilst he really wanted to be here today, he is expected to become a father over the next few days, and we didn't want to take the risk of him being stuck in Amsterdam and not witnessing that magic event, let's say. So Christian, in fact, is our senior flight crew licensing expert, and he's leading the work on the eVTOL licensing requirements at EASA. So also the subgroup that is working on the licensing requirements. After EASA, he was a licensing inspector at Austria Control, the CA of Austria. He has a strong legal background, but he also holds a PPL for airplanes, which he uses frequently when he is not at work. With that, this is the panel, so very welcome again. And maybe just from one of you, just to show the audience why you are here. Maybe Rob, you would like to say something on that, just to...
All right, thanks very much for that, Dan. I guess I'll start off with an introduction on what ECA is and what we do. So I represent here today the European Cockpit Association. We are an association representing the interests, but also the offering the expertise of about 40,000 plus commercial pilots in Europe. Most of our members are full-time ATPL pilots flying large jets, but we also have expertise in the training environment. Of course, we have experts within helicopter flights, and we still represent flight engineers as members as well. Myself, I'm a mechanical engineer by training, airplanes, helicopters, and built and flew unmanned aircraft, as said before, and we're now gaining experience in electric aircraft, which goes to show that we are trying to show that we are working with industry as opposed to against new entrants coming into this airspace. Thank you, Dan.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. I don't know if any of the other panelists would like to say a few words on why you're here, maybe, if you have anything. No, it's quite obvious to me in a way that Volocopter's here and Regine and Frantz.
It should be obvious.
Yeah. So let's not waste too much more time. So let's go to the presentation of Christian. So we hope it works. The intent was that Christian would actually deliver this live, but at the moment we actually have one that back. Can we go back one slide? Yeah. So I hope it works with the audio and the video. So I'm looking at the IT colleagues there. I guess it's frozen. So maybe Christian, you can do it live then. That's even better.
Okay, no problem, Dan. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Perfectly.
Yes. Okay. So welcome to this presentation. Just for the first slides, I would like to give you a very brief overview of the planned regulatory framework for pilots that will be involved in urban air mobility. On this first slide, you see a high-level overview, particularly what you see here is starting from what you see here on this slide is, yes, thank you, is what kind of aircraft that will be involved in urban air mobility will require what type of pilot licensing requirements. Yeah, please stay with this slide. From the left-hand side to the right, when we look at this slide, you see that three different EASA drone categories: the open category, the specific category, and the certified category. Now, for the open and specific category, as you know, rules should be quite well known, because the relevant regulations are already published and in force and applicable. So I'll not spend too much time on this area here and concentrate more on the certified category and the VTOL aircraft, which you see on the right-hand side of the slide. In the context of this overview, I just wish to highlight that although this already published and in place and applicable requirements do foresee training and exams and also assessments, to a certain extent for pilots involved in the operation of the open and specific category. All of these activities do not end up in the issuance of a formal pilot license. So the qualification of the remote pilot involved in open and specific is addressed by other means, for instance, via the operational authorization issued to the drone operator. But there is no formal pilot license. However, when you move on to the right-hand side, certified category, and this is the third EASA drone category for which no licensing requirement is in place yet. It's still under development. And here, indeed, it is foreseen to introduce a full pilot license, the remote pilot license, RPL. And this will be done also in order to establish compliance with ICAO Annex 1, which already today foresees a regulatory framework for such a license in this area. However, urban air mobility will not take place only with certified drones, so the bigger, more complex drones. It will also take place in innovative VTOL capable aircraft where the pilot will be on board of the aircraft. And in this additional category, so the piloted VTOL aircraft you see on the very right-hand side of the slide, there is also the plan to introduce a new license, the VTOL aircraft pilot license, or in short, VPL. So the framework, as I just said, for both these new licenses, the RPL and the VPL, are both currently under development. But while this development is ongoing, we already anticipate that piloted VTOL aircraft will make the start in urban air mobility already in the near future. So we should have a solution in our regulatory framework already very soon that would allow pilots to get a qualification to fly VTOL aircraft. And for this reason, there is a plan to, while the comprehensive framework is still under development, to introduce transitional provisions already rather soon. Next slide, please. Concretely, the plan is for the initial phase, so as a transitional provision, to introduce in the Aircrew regulation the possibility for holders of existing commercial pilot licenses for either aeroplanes or helicopters to obtain an additional type rating for a VTOL aircraft. So I will talk a little bit about the time planning for this for these transitional periods in the for the plan to introduce such a transitional period provision at the end of my presentation. But just as you know, it should be very possible already in the near future for commercial pilot licenses for airplanes or helicopters to obtain additional qualification, additional privileges to fly VTOL aircraft as a pilot on board of the aircraft. Next slide, please. Yeah, thanks a lot. So what you see on this slide is a very high-level overview of the planned comprehensive framework for training for the VPL and for the RPL. As Daan mentioned at the beginning, we're still in the middle of the rulemaking process. So this is a concept which is in detail still under development. But this is the high-level plan. And the plan is that for both the VPL and the RPL, training would take place in the form of competency-based training and assessment, or in short, CPTA. This is a training methodology which is already today foreseen in ICAO Annex 1 for the remote pilot license. And the CPTA is a new training methodology which requires student pilots to develop and to demonstrate through a regular assessment throughout the entire training course a predefined and comprehensive set of competencies that would allow them to perform their job, their pilot task in a safe, effective, and efficient manner. So what would the training look like? The training, as you see on the slide, would basically comprise two modules. First, there would be a basic module. And the basic module would encompass a basic theory and basic practical training that is relevant for any VPL or RPL pilot, irrespective of the particular type of certified drone or VTOL aircraft that he or she will operate. The basic module will need to be completed only once when you do your initial training for initially obtaining a VPL or an RPL. After the basic module, a type-specific module will follow, and this type-specific module will encompass all the type-specific theory and the type-specific practical training, so the type rating training, the very type rating training, as relevant for the particular type of certified drone or VTOL aircraft the pilot intends to operate. And when both these modules are completed, then the respective license, the RPL or the VPL, can be issued. And if subsequently, later on, the pilot wishes to extend his or her privileges to another type of drone, in case of RPL, or VTOL aircraft in the case of the VPL, he or she would need to complete the type-specific module for that other element, for that other aircraft. As I said, the basic module is just for the initial licensing training. So that, in a nutshell, is the current concept that is being progressed with the rulemaking group. Next slide, please. And on the last slide, I wish, as I already said, I wish to give you a very brief overview of the time planning. So the plan for rulemaking task 0230 of EASA is to issue already in the next weeks an NPA number 1. NPA stands for Notice of Proposed Amendments. This is nothing else than a first draft of rules that is published for public consultation. So within the next weeks, this NPA number 1 will be published, and it will lead to, we will get comments, we will take the comments into consideration from the public consultation, and in the mid of 2023, the plan is to publish the opinion. The opinion is nothing else than an updated draft, considering the comments received, which is again published and also forwarded to the European Commission for adoption. And this NPA number 1, where the opinion will go, and the opinion that will be published in 2023 will encompass the transitional provision that I explained before. So the rules for existing CPL for aeroplane or helicopter holders to obtain additional type ratings for VTOL aircraft. And we expect that in the mid of 2024, these rules will be published and start to apply. So by the mid of 2024, it should be possible for CPL holders to obtain VTOL type ratings. In parallel, we are work on the development of an NPA number 2, which you see on the upper part of the slide. And this NPA number 2 will encompass the comprehensive licensing framework for the RPL and the VPL as presented, with the opinion to be published according to the current time planning in the mid of 2024. And with the anticipation that these comprehensive rules will be in place in the mid of 2025. So long story short, in the mid of 2025, it should be possible to start training for the RPL and for the VPL. That's it from my side. I hope I was not too quick, but I'm mindful of the time. And I'm looking forward to having the discussion with the panel now. Thank you very much. Back to you, Daan.
So thank you, Christian. And I'm sure we'll come back to some of the points that you highlighted in your presentation. So before we go into the more, let's say, hopefully enriching panel discussion, just to highlight again that we have the Slido app in the background, as well as the microphones there for you to take part in it. I would really encourage you to do that. As I said, it's an ongoing rulemaking project, and who knows, maybe your inputs could actually, lead to some new ideas that might be useful going forward. So in between, we will switch to Slido a few times. So in this case, we have already some questions. Maybe the second question first, something that Christian could the first question about the medical requirements there. Christian, maybe you could answer this one, given your involvement in that specifically. Can you see the questions, Christian? Are there any medical requirements for UAS or eVTOL pilots out there, similar to medical checks that you should? Yes. Okay. So long story short, for the VPL, so for the VTOL pilot license, the plan is to require the same logic as today for the licenses that already exist today. So for commercial operation, class 1 medical certificate, and if in the future also there will be non-commercial privileges that, or you would exercise only non-commercial privileges, or with your VTOL pilot license, then a class 2 medical certificate would be sufficient. Sorry. Can you still hear me? Yes. Yeah, I hope yes. Yeah. And for the RPL, ICAO, for the remote pilot license, ICAO Annex 1 foresees medical class 3, so the same medical certificate, which is also required for air traffic controllers.
and this is being processed also with the rulemaking task. Thank you.
Thank you, Christian. So the medical requirements for the VPL are still under discussion as well there. Maybe the other first question that is on our screen now maybe is something for Rob to answer there, as he represents more or less our pilot community there, so existing pilot community.
It's certainly a discussion that has been brought up within ECA, especially within our working group of UAS+, the plus standing for unmanned aircraft systems and effectively VTOL aircraft, so manned VTOL aircraft. So the question is, what can an airline pilot do to update their CV to become suitable for a job position in the manned drone industry? Well, first of all, it's a question of whether airline pilots really want to do this. They are highly trained, highly specialized people within a specific area of the industry. Certainly, we take into account that this is a new area of industry which is coming into play, but I think events in the last 2 years or so have really shown that what used to be thought of as a very safe job profession is perhaps still impacted by global events to the extent that we may have to rethink what we can do with our qualifications. And this was a discussion within our UAS Plus group, whether we would actually work with manufacturers to enable pilots who are currently looking for airline positions, but unable to do so or find positions, to work with manufacturers to retrain these persons to operate these types of aircraft and thereby build up at least a form of aviation experience, which they can then later perhaps use to further transition within their career. In terms of updating their CVs currently, certainly within the industry we have a lot of personnel who are dual trained, or if persons have secondary qualifications like myself in the technical engineering industry, programming is becoming more and more of a matter within this new technology area. That would certainly be something that this sector of the industry, I think, would be interested in.
Yeah, thank you, Rob. And maybe from Oliver's perspective, you're representing Volocopter in this matter. What would you say to this individual, let's say, that yeah, I guess you would welcome them, but
So very clearly on the one side, yes, we as Volocopter, we are starting with a pilot on board of the aircraft, which means, yes, we do need pilots. And in the beginning, as Christian nicely explained in there, we have now the path open to transition from legacy licenses into this. So if somebody is interested to become a pilot for something like the Volocity aircraft, for sure the person is very welcome and invited to do so. But be clearly aware it is something different. And what you just said, Rob, that's exactly to the point in there. It's not like flying a classical aeroplane. It's not like flying a helicopter. It's completely different. And for those who want to experience this, maybe also a little side hint, since December it's possible also on the Microsoft Flight Simulator to fly our aircraft in there. Okay. And it's no secret when I'm telling that our flight control system people have invested significant effort in making sure that this aircraft really behaves like the true aircraft. So that gives you a glimpse of what it means to fly it, and it is completely different. It's operating a vehicle in the air. And yes, you need to be willing to do that transition. You need to be willing to accept doing that different type of operations of the aerial vehicle in there. And when this is the case, I think the door is absolutely open.
Perhaps from our point of view, we're at a stage now where the concept or the dream of what for so many young persons was to become a pilot is currently changing. And we have to evolve with that part of the industry, or perhaps be left behind in the next 15, 20 years plus.
Yeah. Okay, thank you for that. I think obviously there's more questions coming, but we had prepared a little script here to give you the various parts. So I suggest to the IT crew to switch back to the presentation and show you the questions, the high-level questions that kind of guide a little bit the interventions today. So starting with so these are 4 questions, and we'll go through them in sequence, and again we will switch over to the Slido as we go along. So for the first question, what are the main differences between the VTOL pilot license, VPL, as Christian already alluded to, and the remote pilot license. So maybe Christian, starting with you, maybe you can, in a nutshell, just sum up some main differences there. I know you explained some of your presentation, but maybe it's also good for added value to give some of the main differences there.
Yes, sure. So the VPL, the VTOL pilot license, will be the pilot license for VTOL aircraft, like the Volocopter, that will, when they will be operated with the pilot on board. This will be the license, let's say, exclusively for this area. The RPL, the remote pilot license, will be the pilot license for any kind of certified drones or any kind of remotely piloted aircraft which falls into the certified drone category or within the EASA drone categorization. Also, another difference maybe to highlight is that the RPL for the remote pilot license, as it follows ICAO Annex 1, by default, it is a license with instrument rating privileges, so IFR. It can be only come with IFR privileges. The VPL, and this is this is subject to ongoing discussion still, but the idea is to introduce the VPL with not only with IFR, but also with VFR privileges and night VFR privileges, and of course also with IFR privileges. So RPL, IFR only, VPL also VFR. And the last point maybe also to highlight, the RPL for sure will be the framework for the RPL. It will be for sure fully ICAO compliant, because we do not, in principle, what we do, we introduce what is in ICAO Annex 1 foreseen, we introduce now into the European framework. For the VTOL pilot license, there is no framework in ICAO Annex 1 yet. So we are developing in parallel with work that is ongoing also at ICAO level in a dedicated panel. And we're coordinating with this panel, of course, where EASA is also represented in that panel. We develop here in parallel and coordinate to also ensure that the European VPL framework will be fully ICAO compliant. But for the time being, we cannot say that this will be our concept for sure. We cannot say at this point that the concept is by default ICAO compliant, because there is no ICAO standard yet.
Yeah, thank you, Christian. And of course, the considerations for VPL already today is being, let's say, debated inside the rulemaking task today. So my next question will be more for my colleague here, Frantz CHOUT, to give us his perspective on whether or not this VPL is really needed going forward, knowing that we have this possibility of conventional pilots with a type rating, and then we have the RPL.
Yes, thank you, Daan. In fact, when we are talking about the VPL, we are talking about challenges, I would say, and opportunities, and we are also talking about competencies. The main challenges and opportunities that the VPL will face is concerning the regulatory. The first one is the regulatory. In fact, as you know, or everybody know, the regulation is not already defined, and we are saying that the two major agencies, the FR and the EASA, will go their own way, and it will be some discrepancies between the two regulations. The FR seems to have the willingness to rely on the SVO concept, the Simplified Vehicle Operation concept. What it means that more automation are on board the VTOL capable aircraft, and less the pilot will need training with different phases. The first one is reduced training, and after that limited training, and with full automation, no training at all, because we will consider that the VTOL capable aircraft is fully automated. The second challenge or opportunities is that we are saying that most of the manufacturers are developing VTOL capable aircraft with various range of variety, in fact. It is really a challenge. And also, most of the manufacturers have in mind the objective to be fully autonomous. And when we are talking about autonomy, we are talking about the capacity of the machine to have the role of the pilot. What does it mean to aviate, so to have the control of the flight with the fly-by-wire, but also to navigate. And navigate, it is not just to follow the flight path, it is to the detect and avoid, in fact. So the capacity for the machine to detect and avoid, because the aircraft will share the airspace with other users with a lot of obstacles also. The third point of the challenges or opportunities is concerning the training by himself, with the fact that the pilots will have a different background. We are already mentioned that some will have a helicopter background or aeroplane background and so on, so a large diversity of background, but it is an ab initio training, and we will have to cope with that, and also to have in mind the use of new immersive technology within the training, within the simulator, with the use of virtual reality, mixed reality, augmented reality, and so on. So it is the major challenges, but also the opportunities for a business developer, for kind of a developer or for the business. We have also to have in mind the competencies that this ab initio pilot will need to have. Christian already mentioned it. The point of view of the EASA is to integrate in the rulemaking task, in the rulemaking framework, the CBTA competency ICAO framework, which is mean that ICAO has already defined 9 pilot competencies, which are, as everybody know, the workload management, the flight path management, manually or with automation, but also the communication, also the situation awareness, and so on. And for these new ab initio pilots, we need to define what competencies will be necessary for them, and it is the task of the rulemaking that began the task some months ago. Just to answer directly your question, why the VPL? From my point of view, my personal feeling is the big push for the VPL. It is the cost saving, in fact, because we already mentioned it. CPL are cost a lot, in fact. And my personal feeling is that the operators and so on would like to have something more simpler, more cost efficient, and reduce the training or adapt the training. And it is my personal feeling, it's the reason why we need some VPL license. What we don't know is how long the transitory phase that Christian KUCHER mentioned will last, in fact, because for the beginning of the operation, we will have pilot on board with license, with CPL license from aeroplane or helicopter. From the authority point of view, we think that this period would last some years, in fact. Because we need some data, we need some researches, we need some studies, we need some scientific evidence base that the future operations will be safe enough to go further. Thank you.
Thank you, Frantz, for that elaborate answer there. Of course, it will be interesting to know. So the VPL is basically enabling the new aircraft here, like Volocopter, Lilium, to start from scratch rather than having to follow the conventional routing. So from I'm coming back to Oliver then, maybe from your perspective, do you see the need indeed for this ab initio path today, based on what you've seen so far?
So I definitely see the need for the ab initio training, and I'm basically seconding what Frantz mentioned with the cost effect is one of the drivers in there, and also there to understand, yes, clearly, also with our products, we are targeting to get at some point in time the pilots, sorry Rob, outside the aircraft in there, but we are also realistic enough to say that won't happen tomorrow. This will take some time to get there. It will take time to first operate the aircraft with the pilots on board, gain, as you said, Frantz, the operational experience to understand what it takes to safely operate these vehicles. And then once we are reaching a certain level of maturity, and for example, also in our case, complement this with the operational experience from our Volodrone, which is remotely piloted initially in there, we can start to raise the level of automation to a level that would allow us to take the pilots off board. But when I'm speaking as an aerospace engineer, I would say, yeah, let's do this rapidly in there, and we are getting on the safe side. But that's not the answer in here. We clearly need to get also the acceptance from our customers, from the passengers flying on the aircraft. And if you test around, who wants to fly today on an aircraft where there is no pilot on board? It will become tricky in there. And it will be different in the regions of the world where we are operating in there. There will be some cultures, some nations where they will be very open to it. Thinking in our European minds, I suspect we will be a little bit more reluctant in that, and there is nobody to blame for that. So that's why I clearly see there will be a very decent time frame while we still will have pilots on board. Then when we come to the level of automation that we technically could do it, we still will have the pilots on board in there as a backup, kind of backup pilot in there, and also to calm down the passengers in there, that they also can start to understand and learn it works. The technology is mature enough and we are safe. And then this transition will happen. And when I look at this time frame, and when I see the number of aircrafts we want to produce, Lilium wants to produce in there, that's an awful lot of pilots that we are needing in there. So the cost factor really kicks in there, and having a properly tailored licensed possibility for this makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, thank you, Oliver. So, I mean, that's clear. So there's some uncertainty. There's also need to gain some further experiences with the way this is going. I don't know from your side, Regine, if you see. And I mean, we're touching upon some of the elements we wanted to discuss a little bit later, but maybe now, Regine,
yeah,
you could
I mean,
say a
I
few
fully
words on this.
support everything that has been said so far, and as respect of this transition phase. I mean, there will be a transition phase, and Lilium, like Volocopter, the aircraft will be piloted initially, but perhaps maybe for a long time until all the data is gathered so that automation can evolve, and then that perhaps one day we think that it can go without the pilot. But this is not for tomorrow, this is not within the next 5 years, this is going to take longer time.
Okay, thank you, Regine. Maybe we can switch over to the Slido. Maybe there's two questions there that we touched upon. Maybe we can just look at those. It is actually the third one. Because some of the other elements are going to be touched upon on the other questions that we'll have planned for you. So maybe to Volocopter this is, do you plan a transition period between manned and unmanned eVTOL when the level of automation will limit the pilot actions and might require much less pilot training? You kind of touched upon that already, but you want to add anything?
I think that goes along with what I mentioned there. I clearly see this transition period in there, but our strategy also there is that we, even when we reach the level of maturity, that the pilot might not be needed anymore on board. We will keep the pilot the possibility to interact for a certain overlapping time in there, that he can intercept when he feels it's necessary until everything is really stable, and then we are transitioning fully over. So it will be smooth transition.
Okay, maybe one last question. And as I said, there's a few that touch upon the other areas. There's one going down on the 5th there. It says post 2024, which is obviously the 2024 being the year where you have the ambition to demonstrate at the Paris Olympics. Will the holders of CPL airplane, helicopters, or conventional pilots still be eligible for a VTOL type rating, or will they then need to complete the, let's say, the ab initio or the RPL? Do you know? Have you thought about this in the rulemaking?
Yes, perhaps,
you have, maybe Frantz?
Yes.
I believe this is largely one for Christian to answer from the
Okay.
EASA side.
Yes.
Yeah, but okay.
But,
I keep forgetting that he's
yeah,
with us. So.
It has been touched upon, and from our side, my understanding is that there will be a longer transition period.
Yeah.
Yeah, just thanks, Rob. Just to complement, I always refer to it as a transitional period, but it is of course the plan that it will stay as a permanent solution. So if even in, let's say, in 20 years from now, you are a CPL aeroplane holder and you wish to change your career and start flying VTOLs, you will not need to get additional license paper. We will still be able to keep your CPLA and get the additional VTOL type rating on board for efficiency reasons, of course. That's the plan.
Yeah, I suppose there could also be conversion towards if we do go into this direction of only RPL, VPL. Yeah. Okay, thank you for that. So going now maybe to the second question that we have there. How to address the broad variety of eVTOL designs, having different levels of automation in pilot licensing. As I said, it was already touched upon by, I think it was Frantz, about competency-based training, but maybe Christian, you could give us an idea, because traditionally we've always approached pilot licensing as a one-size-fits-all helicopter, airplane, kind of way. But looking at the broad variety of these eVTOL designs, how can we handle this with one pilot license?
Yeah, sure. So the idea is here that, and if you recall the slide that I presented before, the basic module was a rather small box and the type-specific module was a rather bigger box. The idea is that the basic module will encompass all, or will focus on all the commonalities for all different aircraft designs, and this is still, of course, under discussion and development of what in detail this basic module should encompass. But the idea is the basic module to address basic and generic pilot competencies that are needed for every pilot, and this will be the smaller package of the overall training. And then the bigger part will then be the type-specific module to focus on the specificities of the specific type. And with this design, you can very well tailor an overall training course to a particular aircraft design. And also the CPTA approach, the competency-based training approach, will help here, because the competencies, the general pilot competencies, as they are set out in the rule, will, on very high level in generic terms, specify what a pilot will need to be able to do. But this high level competence framework then needs, of course, to be adapted when being implemented into a particular training program. And of course, this adaptation would ensure that the particular training program is tailored to a specific type, and addressing all the needs, all the training needs of a particular type. So long story short, the CPTA methodology, and also with is the first pillar, and the second pillar is that we only have a small basic module with the commonalities, and then the emphasis of the training course will be on the individual type aircraft, thereby addressing the broad variety of designs that we will see with VTOL aircraft. Thank you.
Thank you, Christian, for that. So staying with the competencies then, so that is something that we're also seeing in the traditional conventional training today, evidence-based training, for example, being one of the more famous ones today. So maybe Rob, from a pilot perspective, pilot competencies, conventional versus the competencies needed for these newer types of aircraft, where do you see the differences?
Well, first of all, I'd like to go back a little bit to the question with regards to different levels of automation also on these aircraft. The official ECA position will always be that we should try to apply existing frameworks and regulations to these new entrants in as far as possible, and only start to amend or create new regulations where it is required. Now, the concept of type ratings resonates fairly well with us. In general, as a parallel, if you're learning to fly airplanes, you will get a rating on single engine or multi-engine aircraft, and you can fly a multitude of single engine or multi-engine aircraft, because they all operate on basic similar principles. However, if you learn to fly rotorcraft or helicopter, each rotorcraft is so different that you can do your license on one particular rotorcraft, but if you want to fly another helicopter, you will have to do specific training that is a type rating on that aircraft, which is very much similar to what we're looking at here. So the concept of type ratings is absolutely applicable. In terms of pilot competencies in flying aircraft, this comes back also to the definition of what is a pilot and to what level of automation of this aircraft, can we consider the person or the operator on board to still be a pilot, having pilot competencies? ECA has published formally on their website a position paper on that matter, and we do go into different levels of automation. When do you have a pilot? When do you have an operator, or what we like to call a commander? This is published online, and we refer back to the best analysis of levels of automation that we have found that we like to work with is that of the Society of Automotive Engineers, who have more experience in this field in automating aircraft. So I hope that gives people in the audience an area to look back into. And I would remind people that, well, if you're flying an aircraft, it's not just about the hands-on capabilities, but there is more to it. There's also the concept of airspace integration, deconfliction with other aircraft, communicating with ATC. And these are areas which are not necessarily actively trained so much during the flight training program, but learned by experience over time to a large extent. And that we will touch on, I'm sure, in the next question when it comes to FSTDs. That is flight simulation training devices. It's an area that becomes more difficult to train in a simulator, is the interaction in the real world environment with other players.
Yeah, just one point on the competencies there. So there's 9 pilot competencies, ICAO-wise. Do you see any additional competencies for VTOL pilots, or do you only see changes in the observable behaviors?
The technology is certainly changing. In terms of the behaviors of the pilots, I think there's still the concept of, you know, the level mind or a certain way of thinking which would be helpful within the industry. But with these aircraft being, as far as I know, exclusively being designed as fly-by-wire systems, perhaps a technical background in the concepts of automation and control would be helpful in the pilot training program. This is an area that the industry has not yet looked into. Conventional pilot training happens on aircrafts which are basically fully manually controlled, and here we have to start to look at how do we integrate effectively with a computer which interprets the control inputs that the pilot is making to consider whether those control inputs should be given forward to the flight control system itself. So it's a new area of training which is coming in.
Thank you, Rob, for that. And I've just noticed that there's someone that's speaker, so please go ahead with your question.
I have a question for Rob as well, and maybe Christian. So right now we measure experience of a pilot as having flight hours and some training. How do you see that measuring experience in the future with the RPL and the VPL? Will it be also based on the flight hours or other skills such as engineering skills, or maybe having an engineering background? How will we measure that experience?
The point that you're bringing up is very much valid. So, and it is an item that we have discussed within the ECA group as well. For people to understand here within this group, maybe it's interesting, a private pilot license for you to learn to fly yourself and to fly your friends around, you can do this within 45 flight hours, training hours. Now, the difference from a private pilot's license to a commercial pilot's license in terms of training is not very much. You need 45 hours of training for your private pilot's license, and then on top of that, you will need an additional 15 or so training hours to be able to get your commercial pilot's license. The difference lies in the theoretical module, which is much larger for commercially trained pilots, and it is in the flight experience requirements before you are allowed to gain your commercial pilot's license. It's not so much in the training. It is in the 200 hours minimum experience, which you must have before you are allowed to apply for your commercial pilot's license. If you're going to an ATPL, air transport pilot's license, it goes right up to 1,500 hours. And so this is not the training part. This is, as the gentleman put up, it is the experience we build up initially in the industry. And here, the new players are certainly considering or looking at simplifying or creating a new licensing system where the application for this license would become simpler, right? Where we as ECA would like to basically step back and say, well, let's just not consider the training requirements in themselves, but also consider the experience built up over time before we are allowed to do actual commercial operations.
Thank you, Rob, for that. And I think also the fact that you're going with first a conventional license plus a type rating on top already gives some feedback on what kind of experience level we may
in this
need.
particular case, it's the logical entry because we're taking people with experience into the industry.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. One more question from the audience then, please.
Yeah, I have a different question, but before I remark, I was also helping writing Annex 1 from AKO, and I'm in the JARIS group for licensing as well. What you were telling is not how Annex 1 is written. It's competency-based, and making so many hours in an unmanned aircraft is rather a lot. So it's completely different, but that was not my question.
Okay. We are shifting to a competency-based system, that is true.
Yeah. My question actually is a VTOL. I'm from the Ministry of Transport, by the way, in the Netherlands. The discussion about VTOL gives me the feeling that it's only transporting persons, passengers. If I look at the Wikipedia page, it doesn't say anything about passengers. So do the pilot need a special VPL if it is only transporting goods with a VTOL? Is a VTOL exceptionally manufactured for transporting passengers? Because that makes a difference, I think.
It's a good question, maybe for Oliver, to see what you're expecting to come up. But I guess the background is, of course, it remains a commercial flight, cargo or not. It remains a commercial flight. So, but maybe Oliver, you would like to reply to that.
RPL pilot can also transport goods and has the same.
Yeah, if I may.
Oh, maybe Regine, please go. You go
If I
first.
may, the plan is, of course, we talk about commercial and we talk about transporting passenger, moving passenger around from one city to another or regional. But I think that those vehicles can also do cargo transportation as well. Because on the remote drone side, it's already done. It has not the same focus currently. But the vehicle by itself can do both passenger and cargo. So yes, in fact, when you think about VTOL, you can think about both sides, packs and cargo. Mm-hmm. But it's going to be a commercial operation, piloted, a pilot on board. Yes.
And I think that's exactly the differentiation then in there. As long as we keep the pilot on board and transport cargo in there, we are in the same category with a VPL in there. As soon as we take the pilot off board and remotely control or command the aircraft, then we are on the RPL side in there. And I think also when you look at our products, it's matching the options in there. Of course, when I take our Volocity aircraft, which is designed as a air taxi passenger aircraft, there speaks nothing against not putting a passenger on the second seat, but putting a bag of letters. Okay, we are in the email age, but putting some parcels just on the passenger seat, and then we are flying the cargo in there. But of course, what we are targeting at is in there also then to go with the Volodrone, which is the identical technology of the passenger aircraft, has exactly the same flight controls, the same flight control laws, has the same motors, the same batteries. Everything is the same in there. Just we do not have a cabin with 2 occupants in there. We just have a cargo space with 0 occupants then in there, which then is giving the switch to the RPL when we are operating it from the ground in there. So that's it's both. All the permutations are imaginable in there and possible with the system.
Okay, thank you. I would like to move on because our time is taking, but we'll come back anyway at the end maybe as a question, unless it's a very short. It's a hopefully short answer as well. Let's see.
So moving from the passengers to cargo and moving on to the leisure, flying for fun. So how do you see the future? Will the VTOLs be allowed to be owned and operated by private people, for example, in uncontrolled airspace just for fun? Can I own one, keep it in my garage, fly for fun?
I think it's for the designers, right?
Yeah,
And manufacturers.
exactly. Yeah, Oliver.
Well, actually, when you look at our vehicle, we have started off wanting to design a recreational vehicle, but then we recognize the technology is, to really make it safe, the technology is so complex and has so much effort to really get it built, designed, that we changed towards going to the commercial vehicle in there, as at the same time we also recognize there is indeed the market potential for it there, which is justifying this type of development. So looking at today, our plans are clearly not to sell it to private pilots in there. Even more, we are looking at operating the aircrafts that we are producing ourselves in all the different countries, then depending on foreign ownerships, then of course in partnerships with other operators in the target countries. But clearly to even operate them ourselves, because we say it's completely new what we are doing. There is no experience with this. We want to have the transparency on the experience, on the data, to build the statistics on how does this all work? Does it work as we intended it to work? Where do we need to fine-tune? Where do we need to optimize on the technical side, on the qualification side, on the full operational environment side, in order to stabilize this full business in here? It's so new, so early in this phase. Doing a simple little mistake by being too over-enthusiastic and giving the products out is, at our understanding, creating a potential risk to the industry in there. So we want to keep it under control first, but then we will see what happens in there, where this develops to. And very often the high-profile technologies that have been developed with huge investments in the beginning then move into the common space in there and become publicly available. But at the moment, that's not the plan. And yeah, from that end, we do not have a prediction on that.
Yeah, and I understand from Lilium it's more or less the
Yes,
same
the same.
approach. Yeah, good,
Same.
good. So thanks for that, Oliver, as well. And let's move on to the next point in the interest of time. Sorry, the one you were on, on the third one, so one slide back. How important are FSTDs in the VPL training? And maybe it touches upon what we said about, gaining experience with this kind of devices, because of course for the launch for Paris in that sense, pilots need to be trained, and this is where the FSTDs come in. So maybe Regine, you could give your insights about this particular item.
As was saying Christian, the first step would be using pilots already trained, holding a commercial license. And the second step would be the VPL training. But when you think about this piloted aircraft, whether it's Volocopter, us, or others, and you look at some of the design, you would realize there is only one pilot on board and one set of controls. So how do you train them? We want to avoid training on the aircraft. So the use of FSTD in this respect is going to be key. And I believe all OEMs, all manufacturers would like to train all the procedures. So that's the easy part. But there may be some flying part to do as well on those FSTDs in order to avoid training on the aircraft. And the most critical point there would be, how could we gain training credit on those FSTDs that we have to think about, because there are going to be new type of FSTDs, and how we are going to certify and qualify them for gaining this training credit. So there is a lot to think about that.
Yeah, thank you, Regine. And it's all about, it's a bit the chicken and egg, where you have, the aircrafts are being manufactured, we're getting data that should support the device, being able to actually deliver that training on that device and do it safely, so that you don't end up with negative transfer of training, for example, where you learn something wrong on the simulator that is then, of course, then acted upon in the aircraft, and that leads to issues there. So there's a few things there. So you mentioned new types of simulators. What kind of simulators are you referring to?
So let's be a little bit imaginative. You have seen photos from the various VTOLs. If we look at the Lilium, for example, you might have realized there is a canard in the front part of this aircraft. And this canard is going to have kind of engines which are flaps as well. and they will be seen by the pilots when doing the takeoff, vertical takeoff and vertical landing. So for the maneuvering cues, for example here, you need to have a very good visual. What means a good visual? Let's think about that. Second, for the cockpit side, if you think about the cockpit single pilot, the width is less than traditional, so we don't need this big full flight simulator as today for large aircraft. We have a smaller cockpit, we can have something smaller. For the visual together, we can have something smaller, but maybe if we want to see these canals that I mentioned, a traditional dome is not a solution, because how do you manage to see this feature? So perhaps virtual reality or augmented reality is going to be the best solution. And with respect to motion, we don't need a big motion because it's going to be a lighter cabin. So we can have a mini motion. So when you put all that together, you have a brand new kind of FSTD for those VTOL aircraft. And the question is, how are we going to get them qualified so we can get the training credit we need, so we can do not only training, but also partially testing and do a limited aircraft training as a blend. So,
yeah. So there's a few challenges there.
Yeah.
I was going to ask about the special conditions, maybe. If you want to add a few words. I mean, I can say a few words on that because I've also been involved. But, so, like with the aircraft certification, where they use special conditions to certify aircraft. Also for simulators, this can be done. And this is a work that we're involved with some of the manufacturers there to try to get them in place.
So I can add on that as well, because I was part of this task together with a Volocopter representative, but it was also interesting, we had the balloon people with us as well. Because when you look at what the rules are today, there are rules for balloons in terms of checking, but there is no criteria for simulator for balloons. With regard to VTOL, there is not yet anything available for training and checking like an Appendix 9 in Part FCL, and there is no CSFSTD available. So we looked as a team what we could propose to EASA as the way forward. And in fact, if you think about those vehicles, whether it's a balloon or whether it's a VTOL aircraft, it's not an helicopter, it's not an airplane, but it might be a kind of compromise in between or something new. So the idea was to build a kind of a template for a special condition where we list what could be all the potential possibilities to pick from there, from the various existing rule, with the criteria on fidelities, and also to make a link with what we call operational suitability data for simulators coming from the aircraft manufacturer, because definitely those devices would need to reflect properly the aircraft, and the aircraft is going to have some very specific. And so the data to build a relevant simulator to match for training credits would need to come from the aircraft manufacturer.
Yeah, exactly. Sorry, Frantz, please.
Just to correct, but very gently, Regine, it is for the airship, in fact, not the balloon.
Sorry, the airship. Yes, thank you so much.
The innovative airship.
This strange machine.
In the interest of time, maybe just highlight one question from Slido, just to answer. So it says here, current flight training requires several flight hours. Reaching such hours on electric aircraft, such as the Volocopter, such as the Lilium, will be challenging due to recharge time, short aircraft endurance. How does EASA plan to adapt the flight time requirements? I think some of those elements have already been answered, competency-based training, and of course the simulators in this context come into play because maybe more can be done on the simulators, really. So I also understand there will not be so many Volocopters available in the beginning, so maybe more training also for that reason needs to be on the simulator, and of course we need to make sure that it's done in a safe way in the end. All right. So let's move on to the last question, and then if we have time left, we can come back to the Slido. So the next part is about the international perspective, let's say. So the importance of international harmonization of licensing standards. We touched upon it already. Annex 1, ICAO Annex 1 leads to the RPL. VPL is not there yet simply because ICAO has not progressed on that too much.
It doesn't have the mandate.
It doesn't have mandate. Okay, well. Maybe from France, from an authority perspective, do you believe that when we talk about the VPL, should this be harmonized with ICAO in future?
For the VPL, not the RPL, because it is already
It's
done.
clear, yeah.
It's clear.
Yeah.
For the VPL, from an authority point of view, we have some. We are wondering if it is useful because, as you know, the VPL, the VTOL capable aircraft, is within a concept of operation, which is the urban air mobility. So the urban air mobility means that the VTOL capable aircraft will operate in urban environment or outside the urban environment, but with limited range of operations due to technical reason, and notably the duration of limited duration of the battery for the time being. So for the very beginning of the operations, I would say that it is not necessary to have an international harmonization, because we don't believe that we will have to the VTOL capable aircraft pilots to cross the borders and to do the long distance with the VTOL capable aircraft. But saying that, I would say that it is something wishable, in fact, to promote the regional VPL, because you have all understand that the VPL is something European, in fact, and it is something very wishable to promote this kind of licenses, this European licensing at the AKRO level, because as I mentioned in the beginning of the meeting, FR go one way, EASA go one way, and I think at the end of the day that the operators will have some difficulties to certify or to license the pilots if the regional authorities have different way to license them. So the harmonization in this way would be something wishable.
Thank you, Frantz. And maybe just a reaction from Oliver or Regine on your ambition to go outside of Europe or fly from Europe to somewhere else.
I have a clear reaction on
Okay.
that. No, I fully understand your argument with not flying cross-country, which also is only partial true, because one of our launching cities shortly after Paris is Singapore. Singapore is a city-state, and very clearly the Singaporean authority, also as Kahan has elaborated yesterday afternoon in the panel session in there, their intention is clearly to serve cross-country, cross-border missions in there, because that's where they have their traffic problems, on the borders, and they want to overcome this. And whether it's to Malaysia or whether it's to Batam and Bintam, which are the classical ferry routes today, which cost a lot of time and money in there, that's where they have interest in there. But I would like to react also from a different side in there. I mean, yes, correctly, we are not flying internationally in the normal case. Singapore is a special case there, which means in each of the countries we want to operate, Europe aside, where we have one AOC then and one registration for the vehicles in Europe where it works, but in all other countries in there, we need to have a local AOC, we need to have local trained pilots, we need to have local registered aircrafts in there, just due to the fact that we cannot fly cross-country in there, and the freedoms of the air from ICAO do not apply in there. So with this, having a harmonized licensing standard, which then allows us to develop a harmonized pilot training setup, which allows us to also shift pilots from here to there and really use the flexibilities of the system is becoming extremely important.
So from the ECA side, we have a very clear stance that we should be striving towards international ICAO harmonization. From the RPL side, this is possible because ICAO has recommendations in that area. For the VPL, this is not possible because it is not international IFR, but EASA does have the intermediate solution to that.
Yeah. So thanks for that, Rob, and also Oliver for those, and Frantz as well for that. So we're running out of time. I think it has been a very lively discussion. We've received a number of questions on Slido that I understand we can reply to after this event. We'll do our best to do that in cooperation with the participants. But for now, I think we can give a round of applause for our panelists. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much.